Hey everyone, Bruce Eckfeldt here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Make sure that you subscribe and turn on notifications so we can let you know when the next video is posted. You can also check us out at eckfeldt.com for more great content. With that, let's go check out the video.
You're listening to Scaling Up Services, where we speak with entrepreneurs, authors, business experts, and thought leaders to give you the knowledge and insights you need to scale your service-based business faster and easier. And now, here is your host, business coach Bruce Eckfeldt.
Welcome everyone, this is Scaling Up Services. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt, I'm your host. Our guest today is David A. Fields, and David is founder of Ascendant Consulting and is the author of The Irresistible Consultant's Guide to Winning Clients. And we're going to talk a little bit about, how to build a consulting business. We're going to learn about his background and his strategy. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. It's really a delight to be here. I'm a big fan of yours.
And this is a fun conversation because I think building a consulting practice, building a consulting business, I've been in consulting probably for 20 plus years now, I guess, if I do the math. And it is not easy. Consulting is kind of an easy business to start, but it's a harder business to scale and it's a harder business to get right in many respects. So I'm excited about this conversation because I think there's a lot of people out there who are in this boat or in the boat of having built a business, built a practice, and they're trying to figure out how do I take it to the next level. So
Sure.
Why don't we start with a little bit of your background? Because I know that you've been in consulting in kind of different areas. Give us a sense of professional background. How did you get to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I'll do my best to do the short version. I did a decade in corporate, mostly for GlaxoSmithKline, which wasn't GlaxoSmithKline at the time, but it is now.
Yeah.
So got kind of that I was fortunate to get that blue chip training.
Yeah.
Then worked for a boutique consulting firm and helped grow that and went in at the bottom and then worked my way up to partner. And over, again, about a decade, 9 years, something like that. And one of the other partners and I decided to spin off and form our own firm. And so that worked famously well, incredibly well for about 4 weeks. Yeah. And then my partner decided, this whole entrepreneurial thing, maybe not his gig.
Yeah.
He was not the primary breadwinner. And so he could do that. And so I found myself with a business, oddly enough, or unfortunately enough. So we were a pair. His job was to bring in the business. He was a relationship guy, a sales guy, a rainmaker.
Yeah.
My job was to be the engine room.
Yeah.
Because these were the roles we had played working, each of us working our way up to partner at that boutique.
Yeah.
I'm an engine room guy.
Yeah.
Create cool models and great delivery and all of that kind of stuff. And so I found myself without a partner, without clients and rapidly without money and had to learn. So the first year was a total disaster, but year 2, I had done just shy of 7 figures, and then kind of never looked back.
Yeah.
Now, some interesting things happened along the way. I changed my model to a general contractor model, where I actually ended up being the person who sold business, and then I would bring in subs to do the work, which is very common now, but wasn't as common 10 or 12 years ago.
Yeah. And
through that process, I really became a student of why and how clients choose certain consultants, because I was choosing consultants for every project. I was a client.
Yeah.
And also how you sell and win bigger projects and more lucrative projects.
Yeah. That model, because I see that model again and again. You kind of have one partner who's one kind of part leader of the company who's the sales relationship client person, and the other person, another one who's very focused on delivery, on operations, on, executing on what is sold. Is that, do you see that as a pretty typical or a pretty standard model for a lot of companies?
Well, I think it's important to have those roles covered.
Yeah.
What you'll find is, any of your listeners who are in partnerships with one other person, they will tell you, that's not easy.
Yeah.
2-person firms tend to be fairly unstable and challenging to pull off over the long run. It's all the struggles of a marriage without the good parts. So 2 people is tough. And I work with a lot of 2-people firms. I was actually up in, I won't say the exact city. I don't want to embarrass anybody. But I was at a client last week doing a session. And it was basically marriage counseling. I walked into a maelstrom.
Yeah.
One partner was furious at the other. He was almost in tears. And, this is not uncommon.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I even find that a lot of the situations, like you get brought in on an issue and the surface level argument is about one thing that actually seems pretty innocuous. And you realize that this is just a proxy war for some historical thing that happened 5 years ago that hasn't been resolved.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
We can talk about partnerships because the whole idea of partnerships is very interesting. And I see a lot of what works and what doesn't work. But at any rate, what happened then is at some point, some of the consulting firms I was bringing in as subcontractors started to say, hold on a second. How are you winning all this business? How come when you asked me what I would charge for a project, I said 125 and you sold it for 495?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so purely as a lark, I took on a couple of consulting firms as coaching clients. And it really was just as, this would be kind of funny. I'll do them a favor.
Yeah.
That's now 95% of my business.
Yeah.
It's almost completely crowded out the corporate side. I love doing it. So I basically work only with boutique firms now. I take on some solos to help them in that transition. If they want to be just a successful solo practice, that's fine. Or if they want to make that really difficult leap. But a lot of what I do is how do we get you from 2 to 10? How do we get you from 10 to 50?
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, that's the whole thing now.
Great niche. I mean, I think that, one of the things, we always talk about is if you want to get bigger and if you want to scale and if you want to scale faster, you got to focus. You got to decide on all the things you're not going to do. So this idea of zeroing in on how to work with boutique consulting firms, is a great target. Was that a difficult choice for you, or was that a pretty natural, like pretty obvious, this is what you should be doing?
So, I follow the market.
Okay.
Which is what I always recommend, right? It's the foundational principle in consulting and probably for any service business, but certainly in consulting, the number one principle is being what I call right side up, is understanding that the business isn't about you.
Yeah.
It's about them. It's about your clients.
Yeah.
And I had learned this when I was at the boutique where I'd sort of learned my craft. And then I've learned that here too. It's because the market asked me for this.
Yeah.
It's because consultants were saying, how do you do this? Will you help? That I said, sure. So I didn't go out looking for it. What I did is I was open to the opportunity.
Yeah. Pay attention to what is out there.
Exactly.
I think on one hand that seems kind of obvious. On the other hand, I'm sure it's difficult for many people. What ends up getting in people's way of not just listening, not just following the market?
Oh, are you kidding? It's brutally difficult. I do huge sessions on this. And this is as true with people who are starting up as it is. I'm working with a firm that's about $40 million right now. We had a 2-day session in New York, and a lot of it was, how do we get ourselves more focused?
Yeah.
So you would think this is easy. It's actually very difficult. The big obstacle is the person looking back at you in the mirror.
Yeah.
Because the number one starting place for a typical consulting firm is, what have we done in the past? Who are we?
Yeah.
What's our definition? Who's looking back at us in the mirror?
Yeah.
What are we good at? And that's the wrong place to start. The right place to start is, what are the big market problems? Now, which of those could we solve? But we got to start with the market problems. What does the market want? Because the thing is, you can learn a new skill. You can learn to solve a problem.
Yeah.
What you can't do is make people have the problem you solve. At least you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to.
You can't change to what they care about. Yeah.
Right.
So
back in the days when I was in product management and ran like cough cold businesses, we would joke about sending sick people on airplanes, to spread the flu. You can't really do that.
Yeah. And so where do you find the insight? I mean, I think it's one thing to say, follow the market. It's another thing is like, where do you actually get the market insight, the understanding of what the market wants? Like, what are the strategies you recommend, or what is the process that you put people through in terms of actually getting really specific about that and really understanding, at a deeper level, what the market needs are?
So, I have an exercise. You're exactly right. I put people through something I call the problemeter, which is basically figuring out what's the problem that you want to solve, that you want to focus on. Because that is the critical piece. This is actually more than anything else what holds back a small company. This is one of the early hurdles is figuring out what is that problem. But, this is not rocket science. Like most of the consulting and service business, it's a very simple business. It's just not an easy business.
Yeah.
You just have to do some research and ask people. Now, you have to ask the right question. And one problem is people tend to ask the wrong question.
Yeah.
People tend to say, hey, Bruce, I'm really thinking about starting a business in extrusion of plastic or helping plastic water bottle extruders. What do you think of that? Would you think that would be good? That is just fundamentally the wrong question. The right question I want to ask is, hey, Bruce, what problem or problems have been so pressing and urgent and burning for you over the past year or two that you actually spent money to have somebody help you solve them?
So I like that. I like it for many reasons. But one of the reasons I really like it is because you focus on the money. And I think that's, I came out of the lean, agile software development movement and, whole kind of lean product and lean startup
Sure.
and this whole idea of customer development. And one of the things that from a product point of view, people always kind of got wrong was, asking people, well, is this a problem for you? And they would say yes, and there would often be lots of problems that they had, but it wasn't necessarily the biggest problem, and it wasn't the problem they would put money against. And it wasn't until you had money exchanging hands, even if it was a pre-release, pre-order, but getting them to put money onto the problem was a really good indicator, was real evidence that this problem was big enough that we could build a product around it. And I think that's the same thing on the service side, right? You can, when you see people spending money trying to solve something, that's an indicator that it's a problem that has some weight or has some meat.
Exactly. And I'm a huge fan of being a follower.
Yeah.
So that's why I said I didn't want to know, will you spend money on it? I want to know what you have already spent money on.
Yeah.
Because here's what I know is if you've spent money on a problem, two things are immediately clear to me. One, there's a decent chance you're going to spend money on it again. Mm-hmm. Because people who spend money to solve a problem spend money to solve the same problem over and over again.
Yeah.
This is why you get junkies in various forms of self-help or of because they keep trying to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And the other thing I know is if you've spent money to solve that problem, there's probably someone like you who's in your position who hasn't spent the money yet, but will.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I told one of my clients the other day, I don't want to be the first restaurant on the corner. I want to be the third restaurant on the corner.
Yeah. No, and I like that. I think that a lot of people are trying to be or focus on the idea of being first to market. Well, that they're either trying to be first to market, and sometimes that's not the best place to be, particularly if the market's not developed yet or it isn't really proven yet. The other one is that they when they see someone already kind of in a market, that kind of turns them off. They say, oh, well, so-and-so is already doing that. It's like, well, no, look, if they're doing it, that means there's money there. That, if they've got a successful business, the question is how are you going to approach it the same way? Is it different geography? Do you have a different, set of attributes that you're going to sell against? I mean, there's room for other players in markets.
Well, that's exactly it. There's tons of room. And actually, so one of the things that I say, which is fairly different, I think, from where people tend to think is I say, don't worry about differentiation. As a matter of fact, don't differentiate.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Differentiation. Yeah. So I grew up in consumer products. Okay. And it was all about differentiation. Yeah. And then I thought, okay, well, that must be, that's obvious. That's marketing, differentiate. Well, that's actually all wrong when it comes to consulting.
Okay.
Because the buyer of consulting services isn't looking for different. What they're looking for is solved. They're looking for credible, reliable solution to their problem. So if you say, look, I've got something really new, whiz bang different, their reaction is going to be, oh, that doesn't sound proven. I don't want to be the first one to try it. This isn't technology. I don't want to be the first one with an iPod. I want just my problem solved. I want you to help me get my software out the door quicker, or help me with my leadership issue. Or right, we're not, in most cases, about 95% of cases, they're trying to solve a pain.
Yeah.
And they don't want different.
So less about different and more about proven, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Credible, reliable. And as you said, there's plenty of business out there. I mean, last I looked, the U.S. economy was somewhere around $14 trillion in advisory services alone, services of all sorts. So the folks who are listening here, whether they're in architectural engineering or any kind of advisory services, is somewhere around $800 billion. Yeah. Which is enough for you, Bruce, and me, and like 6 of your listeners to divvy up and probably leave at least a little bit for some other folks.
Just a bit.
Just a little bit. And we're generous that way.
So talk to me about the proven, because I think that's an interesting angle. Like so prospects, customers want problems solved, and then they want to know they're going to get solved. They will pay for solutions that they feel are reliable, credible. How do you deliver a message? How do you deliver a pitch that gives that to them, that is successful in closing those deals?
Okay. Can I gently push back on one word?
Yeah.
I'm going to gently push back on the word pitch. I don't think consultants pitch. Pitching is, let me have your money. I'm going to do something cool, and along the way, you'll benefit.
Okay.
Whereas consulting is, let me help you, and along the way, I'll benefit.
Got it.
And, and again, because we don't create problems. If someone has a problem, we can help them with it. But the credibility piece, which starts to lead towards trust, and trust is the number one determinant of which consulting firm, if any, a client will turn to, and probably which accountant they'll turn to, which, whether attorney, architect, you name it, is going to be based on trust, some belief that you can help me, that you have my interests in mind, that you're not going to make me look bad, those being the three components of trust. There are long-term ways to build trust, and there are short-term ways to build trust. There clearly, the more expertise you have and that you're able to demonstrate, the easier it is. The number one thing clients look for, unfortunately, is industry expertise.
Oh, geez. Yeah. So let's talk about that one a little bit, because I think that is sort of the biggest issue I find in most of these kind of, consulting situations is, on one hand, a client wants industry expertise, but they don't want people that are working for competitors and things like that. Like, how do you
Right.
kind of balance this? I'm not sharing competitive information. I'm not working with your direct competitors, but I want you to have worked with my direct competitors. Like, how do you bridge that gap, or how do you
Frankly, I
balance
don't worry
it?
about it.
Okay.
And I will say I work with your direct competitors.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to tell you about them any more than I would tell them about you.
Yeah.
If need be, depending on the situation, we will have different teams working on your businesses.
Okay. So you'll
you want that
the walls,
expertise,
yeah.
as you said. You want someone to work on your competitors who understands the business, just not someone who will allow your knowledge of them
confidential
to,
information.
Right. To affect what we advise you, and vice versa, because that wouldn't be kosher.
Yeah.
But I work with you'd have to pay me huge premiums to get an exclusive in an area.
Yeah. I mean, again, on the development side, that was always the issue too. It's like, we want you to have, large code repositories of all the things that we typically need in our industry. Anything you write for us has got to be proprietary. So, like, we want the benefit of you sharing everyone else's, everyone else's code base, but we want our code base to be locked away. It's always a challenge.
Well, it's good. It's good to ask for that, and I appreciate you asking. Yeah. And that's not going to happen. And in fact, it's not really what you want. And let me explain why.
Yeah. Or you're going to pay a significant premium.
Yeah, but the premium they'd have to pay, they wouldn't be able to swallow.
Yeah. Well, typically that's the counter. That gets them back to, okay, fine, we won't make it exclusive.
Yeah, because it's going to be 5-10x. I mean, but yeah, that's in most cases. A matter of fact, the research on this is unequivocal that the number one attribute clients look for is industry expertise, which I find enormously frustrating. That's not what they should be looking for. And my first book was written for clients, because remember, my business started off as a GC model, and it was all about helping clients. And so my first book was how to find and hire consultants. And I said, stop looking for situation expertise.
Yeah.
You don't need someone who's expert in your situation. They're walking all around your building. You need someone who's expert in the outcome you're trying to achieve. And that's, that was like beating my head against the wall. That might be right, but clients don't care. They're like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Have you worked in my industry?
So is this like just they need to check the box, or is this like,
no?
This is more than just, I'm not going to start talking to you unless I think that you've got industry expertise. It was something that they were literally using as a criteria for making a final purchase decision or hiring.
It's very often a criteria for a final purchase. It's a qualifier to even get in the door in many cases. Now, it's not always. That's not 100%. That's just the number one attribute.
Yeah.
And so it's far easier to build your business if you have industry focus. These folks I was just talking about that are on my mind, because I'm actually meeting with them again this afternoon. They're at about 40 million. Are completely focused on one narrow aspect of the insurance business. Right? Which is very common. There's a group I work with down in Virginia focused in a very narrow aspect of pharma. And we've built them quickly over the couple of years from basically startup to, I think they're going to do about 4 or 5 million this year, which isn't so bad in a couple of years.
Yeah.
It's about a $10 million group I work with out in California that focuses exclusively on municipal waste.
Yeah.
Right. Solid way. Talk about focus.
Yeah.
One narrow thing. And yet, it's millions and millions and millions of dollars. So, that's where you build. That's the basis for a strong firm.
And so do you advise your clients to choose that so they kind of get through that hurdle or get over that hurdle of industry expertise? Okay. And then what else? So once you kind of have the industry expertise angle, what else goes into the kind of process for helping prospects trust you or feel confident that you're going to be able to solve their problems?
Okay, so because we got into this through trust. So part of it is industry expertise. If you have case studies, if you've done it before, like you and I have been around for a while, so a certain amount of gray hair does help because we've seen it, we've been there, right? We've made the mistakes and seen how to do it right. So all of those things help. I write a fair amount, and so people can see what my knowledge base. When I'm on stage, people can see it. So some of that becomes very easy. You can demonstrate and you can get a brand over time. But there are things you can do very quickly that will help you build trust. A few of them, just for instance. One of them is listen. It's remarkable. Most people do a pretty lousy job of listening. Listening is very difficult. But if you will just listen, you will build trust. The person at least knows that you are hearing them. Right? That you are paying attention to them, that you're listening well enough you can reflect back, that you're focused on them. That builds trust because they know most people don't focus on them. Most people aren't listening. Most people are just rehearsing what they're going to say next.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, there's this kind of trust equation out there. And I remember one of the variables being to the extent, one of the negative variables was to the extent that they perceive you as self-focused. Right. And if you come across as being self-focused, not them focused, that's going to reduce your trust. So this idea of, if you can listen and actually, show them that you're hearing what they're saying and actually, thinking about it and reflecting it back to them using active listening and stuff like that stuff will increase your level of trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
I'll give you one little technique. This is more technique-ish than philosophical because part of what we're talking about is philosophical. So let me give you something that is just flat out technique. It's something I call loopbacks. And it's making a small promise and then living up to it. So, for example, let's say you and I are having a conversation, Bruce, and you ask me, could I give you a couple of examples? I might say, yeah, I can give you a couple of examples. If you don't mind, let's get back to that in 5 minutes, just so we can finish a couple of things we're talking about. And then 5 minutes from now, I say, now you wanted some examples. Let me give you those examples. Okay. What I've done is I've made a small promise, and then I've looped back to that promise.
Delivered on it. Prove delivery.
Exactly. You see, what happens is when you're working with a prospect, a potential client, a potential customer, they want to trust you, but they don't have any experience with you on the big things. They don't have any experience with you delivering on the big commitments. And so all they can do is base their judgment on how you perform on the little things. Did you show up on time? If you promised something, if you promised materials, did you send it to them? Right? All those little pieces. And you can actually create opportunities for yourself to demonstrate that you live up to your commitments.
Yeah, I like that. I think I use that a lot of, promising to send them something, a follow-up, with an article or a book or something like that. And, that's important for me in the beginning of the relationships is having those little things where you're making promises and delivering them and sending it to them later and vice versa. I think that's the thing I'm always looking for too is finding ways for them to make little promises and deliver on it because that shows me that they're interested and they're engaged in the relationship and the conversation by actually following through on things. If they don't deliver, that's an indicator for me.
Yeah, that's very smart. That's great.
Yeah. So what else about trust? So these are the things that a firm can do to build trust in the kind of sales conversation in that sales process.
Sure.
Anything else that we haven't talked about?
Oh, I mean, there's tons, right? Because there's whole books written on this, and this is just one aspect. I mean, ultimately, the biggest, I think, skill sets that are critical in this is one, the ability to listen.
Yeah.
I teach half-day modules for firms on listening. It's one of my most popular ones. It's actually one of the most fun ones to do.
Yeah.
And no, it's not what you think. We don't just sit for half an hour quietly listening. So that would be fun too. So listening. So that's half of it. But then the other half is being able to take what you've listened to and reframe. You create trust. You build credibility when you are able to demonstrate to your client that you know their world perhaps better than they do, or you can see it in a way that they haven't thought of before, but that will be incredibly beneficial.
So is this just reflecting back to them, this is what I've heard you say is this, or is this, I've heard you say this and I'm thinking of it this way, like you're adding something new to it?
Oh, okay. No, yeah. Matter of fact, ideally it's, here's what I've heard you say. And that makes a lot of sense. In fact, that is a very common way to think of it. If you're open to it, I'd like to show you a different way to think about this. Here's how I would do this. I would think about this in 3 parts. And now you're creating a model for them. You're creating a framework, something they can hang their hat on and go, holy cow, I didn't realize that, that's how it worked. So consulting to me is a very simple business. There's really only three parts plus strategy. There's only three parts. You got to win engagements and you have to create value. That's the spinning cycle. I mean, that's the heart of it, right?
Yeah.
We win engagements and we profitably create value. Underneath it, you have infrastructure that keeps that cycle spinning.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the whole business. Super simple. Once you understand that model, then you can work off of it. Then you can build your business.
Yeah.
You can see what do we need to do with each of these and wrap strategy around it. What do we need to do then?
Yeah.
So that's just one example of a simple model, and being able to give your prospects a way of thinking of the world that simplifies it and helps them and is different and gives them an insight, builds trust, builds credibility. And really, it shows what you're doing, which hopefully you do.
Yeah.
that helps, of course.
Well,
the best way to be trusted is to be trustworthy.
To be able to successfully deliver on what you're promising. So what else typically goes kind of right or wrong inside consulting firms in terms of, like, if we get the market focus right, if we get the trust right, what are the big things that you need to focus on or put in place to successfully scale a consulting firm?
Sure. Well, so there are three very common challenges in a boutique firm. A boutique firm is one challenge they're facing is how do we get more rain and especially get more rainmakers? I was talking yesterday to the COO of a firm that just called me and said, we've got 200 consultants, probably two of whom are producing 75% of the revenue.
Wow.
That's not unusual.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we get the rest of the rainmakers? We have 30 people at the rainmaking level. How do we get them to more consistently create rain? How do we, when we get rain, how do we make that rain bigger, right? So that's one problem. More rain from more rainmakers. And that comes from having the right process more than anything, right? Because and that's going to be true in almost all these cases. The second big challenge for a boutique firm is how do we profitably scale?
Yeah.
How do we grow this thing and produce and continue to produce good results with quality?
Is that typically the issue? Is that quality tends to suffer? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's easy to do when you're 5 people and it's, very dynamic and you're all talking to each other and you can maintain everything. You get to 500 and all of a sudden that communication starts to break down.
The firms, there's some natural inflection points. And by the way, only 1% of consulting firms make it past $20 million. So
1% in number. So only 1% of the, okay, got it.
1% of all firms get past that.
Yep.
So, so let's say you're trying to build it to 10 million or 15 million. There are some important inflection points to get past. Once you get a lot past 20 million, once you're at, this firm actually yesterday is 100 million. Once you start getting 100, 200, 300 million, you actually look much more like any corporation.
Yeah.
And the problems are a lot like corporations. But, sub 30 million, the problems are quite different. Number one being how do we get more rain from more rainmakers? Number two being how do we scale profitably? And number three being how do we attract and retain top talent?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, talent's always an issue.
Exactly. Talent is always an issue. And those are not completely separate issues. They're intertwined. Now, often there will be an aspiration that will tack on that I hear, which is how do I get out? How do I sell? Yeah. And, my response is always, I'm not actually here to help you build a business to sell. I'm here to help you build a business you want to keep.
I like that.
That's because that's where I like to play. You might want to sell it, but I'm not an investment banker.
Well, I think also, it makes sense. If you want to keep it, that's going to be more likely that other people want it too.
Well, that's true.
If you don't want to keep it, there's probably a reason that other people don't want it then.
Yeah, that's true. Though there are some differences between building a firm to sell and building a firm to keep. Yeah. And you invest more in a firm you want to keep. And, whereas a firm you want to sell, you can do some short-term things that will drive up revenue. But to really make a healthy, growing firm, in consulting especially, you have to invest in what everybody says is the number one asset, but we tend to underinvest in, and that's the people.
Yeah. And where do you invest? So it's easy to say, invest in your people, but how do you actually do that? Like, what are the areas that you look at where you suggest firms, invest in terms of, talent?
Yeah, well, talent acquisition and talent management. It's actually the first staff position I recommend adding. Yeah. When you get to a size where you can have staff people, meaning someone who's not in some way creating value directly for a client, either because they're an analyst behind the scenes or they're a consultant or a principal or an owner facing the client. What's the first position you have that doesn't do any of that? It's a talent development person. Someone knows how to find talent, how to develop them, how to pay attention to your people, figure out who needs what kind of support, what kind of prodding, what kind of growth. The firms I work with that have put that in place accelerate past the rest of them. They zoom past the rest because their people they're digging it, right? They have a passion for it that's been stoked. They are living it. They're seeing they're growing. They're winning more clients. It makes all the difference in the world.
I think it makes a lot of sense. The challenge or I think the misstep a lot of folks make in that move though is they end up hiring like an HR person who ends up being like an admin. Right. Someone who's making sure that there's a policy in place and a time off manual, or like all these things. And that's not, because I think that's the miss.
You outsource that stuff.
Yeah.
That's like you said, HR stuff that you can outsource.
Yeah.
But people development, talent management, thinking through what skills do we need to give our people, and then how do we give them? And then again, on an individual level, how do we develop these people, and do we have the right people? How do we make sure we've got A players? Who's identifying the B players and helping them walk out the door?
Yeah. Is this culture? I mean, we're talking about, the actual company culture as well?
Sure. Part of it. Having a culture on purpose.
Yeah. Every company has a culture. Whether or not it's a good culture is a different question.
Right.
Yeah.
That's part of it. Because someone who has the time and wherewithal to really think that through, and really think through those organizational issues. One of my clients is struggling with this because the owners are at are our age, and there's no one in the middle, and then they have a bunch of millennials, and folks are hiring directly from school. And they're absolutely mystified. Like, what is making these kids think? What's making them tick? How come they don't behave the way we behaved, or at least the way we think we behaved?
Yeah, exactly.
When we look at our past through rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah.
And, what they need actually is someone who can help them manage and develop these millennials.
Yeah, that's a big one. As the senior folks move into these leadership positions and are looking at, developing younger talent, that is a whole kind of art in itself. I've seen people that can do that really, really well, and I have some people that just struggle enormously with figuring out how to develop younger, earlier stage talent. It's not easy.
No, it's not. The whole human capital side is very, very difficult. It's important, but it's one piece. You still do need to be able to make rain. You've got to have a revenue generating engine that works and that you can rely on. And you have to have scalable delivery. Now, if you get those three together, then you're starting to cook with gas, as they say.
Yeah. So now I'm curious, how do you typically work with clients? Like, what's your engagement structure with the firms that you're advising, coaching?
Well, it depends which of those three they're looking for.
Okay.
Right. So are they looking for overall growth, or are they looking for, you just help us on our revenue generation? I do. It's probably about 50-50.
Okay.
Right. So when it comes to, can you help us attract and retain the right people? I don't play in that area, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. You advise them that it's something they need to fix, but that's not your area of
well, I'm not a recruiter.
Yeah.
I'm not, so I do the first two. I don't do the third one. How do we make more rain? Or how do we scale the business? If it's scaling the business, it doesn't look that different from any other consulting gig. I have a diagnostic that's pretty well proven. We spend a couple of days together. I interview tons of people in addition, and often talk to clients. Yesterday, I was on a ride along actually with a client at their client to understand how they are presenting, how they're perceived. So I tear apart the business.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's a nice diagnostic. There's 19 levers we can look at to see which ones need to be focused on. And then we set priorities, focus and knock them out. It's not overly complex, as in any
but
other
it's not
business.
Easy.
Yeah, well, as in any other business, it's hard to fix it from the inside.
Yeah.
I have a business coach that helps me with my business. You think, wait a second, I grow consulting firms for a living. Why would I have someone help me? Because I'm in it.
Yeah, exactly. You're in the bottle. You can't read it.
Exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly right. And so, so some of it is helping them see the obvious. Some of it is helping them just focus. Yeah. Someone has to smack them and say, no, don't hang on another project. Let's get this thing fixed. Yeah. But some of it, of course, a lot of it is experience. I built a lot of firms. And so I can say, don't go down that path. You can, by the way. I'm just going to tell you it probably won't work.
Yeah, this is probably what's going to happen.
Yeah. And here's a path that I've seen work over and over and over again. So, it's not overly complex. It's just a path that seems to work.
Yeah. David, if people want to find out more about you, about the work that you do, what's the best way to get a hold of you and get more information?
Website's easy, davidafields.com. and pretty much everything is there. I'm easy to reach.
Yeah, it's a great site. I've gone through it a couple of times. I'll make sure that the URL is in the show notes here so people can click through and get more information, contact you. David, that's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. You asked great questions.
Thanks. No, this was fun. I mean, I'm sure we could go on for another couple of hours, but we'll set up some time to do more detailed episodes in the future.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Scaling Up Services with business coach Bruce Eckfeldt. To find a full list of podcast episodes, download the tools and worksheets, and access other great content, visit the website at scalingupservices.com. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at scalingupservices.com/newsletter.